Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by Gerry Hamilton and CJ Vogel. Time for this week's edition of the Recruiting Breakdown. And Gerry, each and every week here at On Texas Football, the Recruiting Breakdown is brought to you by Texas alum Mark Saunders.
Absolutely. Mark Saunders he's the only insurance agent you'll need. And I'm serious when I say that. He protects all your stuff from your home, your car, your boat, to your motorcycle, RV, and ATV. That makes him the only guy you'll need if you're in the Austin and Round Rock area in the entire state of Texas. Give Texas All-State agent Mark Saunders his office a call today, 512-218-8571. Do what so many other On Texas Football family members have done. That's give your business and give the call to Mark Saunders with over 35 years of experience. Again, 512-218-8571.
CJ, I hate to make work demands of you on your birthday, but we need the graphic. First off, happy birthday. Second off, let's look at that graphic of the upcoming decisions. And goodness gracious, there's a lot of them. Including this graphic, guys, there's 3 that have been finalized since this was made. Deari Simeon announcing on the 27th, along with Chase Calicut and Malachi Lee. Trenton Henderson, the 5-star edge out of Pensacola, Florida. He and Kosi Okpala, the linebacker out of Katy Matey Creek, both going to announce their decisions on July 2nd. Gerry, as we look at the announcements set to come down on Friday, let's start with Malachi Lee, because I know we've talked about that one this week, but as we get closer to decision day and Texas and Michigan are in on pretty much all 3 of these guys, when you talk about the big-time offensive tackles left on the board with Malachi Lee, John Turntine, and Felix Ojo, Gerry, whichever school Malachi Lee picks, how do you see that impacting Texas, whether he commits to the Longhorns or picks whether it's Michigan, Alabama, or Georgia on Friday?
Well, I think the Texas-Michigan kind of look is interesting because some people think John Turntine's Texas or Michigan. Now, I know A&M's still fighting, but could that impact both of these guys in a weird way? And that's what we're going to kind of look at a little bit positionally. But Malachi Lee he's a fascinating recruitment because nobody knows. The college coaches, this is one I don't think there's a feel for in general right now. Now, that could change tomorrow, right? The next day. So obviously he's going to let people know before he announces on Friday. But as of right now, nobody really seems to have a good feel for where he's going. I think the consensus is probably Michigan or Texas. Michigan was the favorite early on, but then he takes 3 SEC. He puts 3 SEC schools in the Final Four. So if you're Michigan, you're feeling a little uneasy about that, honestly, because your odds just went down. But it's going to be fascinating to see where he goes. But I do think heading into the Michigan visit, you heard the most chatter about Texas and Michigan, with Georgia 3rd and Alabama 4th.
CJ, what do you make of this offense? We've talked a lot about the 3 offensive tackles left on the board, but what do you make about this Malachi Lee decision and what it does potentially for John Turntine or Felix Ojo?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see which of those 2 following, if Malachi Lee ends up at Texas, kind of shuffles the board for them, right? Is it a case in which all 3 end up at Texas? I see is very unlikely. We've talked about that at previous cycles with high-end, high-profile recruitments at multiple positions or multiple prospects at the same position. Normally, you don't see that always ending up as the case. But if Texas lands Malachi Lee, you start looking down that list, and John Turntine's decision's the next one up. Does that change or spark a fire for Felix Ojo to make an instant decision? We'll see. Of course, we noticed early on in the cycles, really after that first official visit weekend for the Longhorns, when folks start seeing their spots get taken, you want to move up. You want to get into a position before the boat leaves the dock. And Texas saw that with a pair of defensive linemen. We thought that might have been a case with the Sam Roseborough moving his official visit up a week as well. Evidently, that was not the case as he ended up at Texas A&M. But if Texas lands Malachi Lee, my eyes turn to a Felix Ojo and say, all right, I know that he's kind of been on that path to decide right around the start of his senior season. Does an immediate decision follow to get in the fold with John Turntine's coming up about a week later?
Gerry, I want you to hypothetically kick Kyle Flood out of his office right now, and you're the offensive line coach at Texas. If you get a commitment from Malachi Lee on Friday, how are you playing it with Turntine and Ojo going forward? Do you change how you're recruiting both those guys? Do you prioritize one over the other? How would you handle it if you were Kyle Flood and you get Malachi Lee on Friday?
First of all, you said hypothetically. Like, I actually haven't done that before. Now, look, that's what's going to be really interesting. Is I look there. I don't see a scenario, and I could be wrong, where all three of these guys go to the same school. I mean, look, there becomes log jams, right? And things make sense, doesn't make sense. But I'm here to tell you, I think Malachi Lee's as good as any of these guys. And so I think when you look at it with Malachi Lee and Turntine and Ojo, you're now in a position of if you get two or three of them, if you get two out of the three, you're very happy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's the reality of where this is. Now, what's interesting about OL recruiting, though, is about a month ago, I didn't see any way they weren't going to sign 5 guys. Right now, I see a scenario where they don't sign 5 early. And I didn't see that a month ago. So just the way kind of some of the dominoes have fallen, what we talked about going into this, how are those dominoes going to fall and how's it going to affect things? But I think right now, if you're Texas, you hope to get 2 out of 3 of these guys. And if you do, you're extremely happy.
CJ, let's go to Chase Calicut out of North Shore. He's going to announce on Friday as well. What was the scuttlebutt you heard, if any, coming out of the official visit over the weekend?
Yeah, I heard it was a great visit for Chase Calicut. Of course, there's familiarity there with Mark Orfe, former North Shore Mustangs, back out of the Houston area. Look, I think in the spring, Texas was the school Calicut wanted to go to. I thought Texas was the pick for him. If a decision would have come maybe in late April, I thought Texas was going to be that early decision. And then you kind of hear things go dry. Of course, he at some point released a top 4 without Texas in it, and then rearranged and had a top 3 with Texas, Ohio State, and Georgia in it. And all of a sudden you're saying, okay, what kind of changed here for Chase Calicut? Well, big news is that official visit went very well. And right now I would put Texas in that pole position. Of course, Georgia's a school to keep a close eye on as well. Tough for defensive players at any level, any state. Look at Georgia's defense and say, I don't want to be a part of that, but Texas is nearing that conversation as well. Also, I think it's close for the family for him to stay close. That was a big point of emphasis in the spring. I would be surprised if that was something that completely went by the wayside as the months continue. So all in all, I think Texas is in a great spot for Chase Calicut at the moment, and we'll see when that decision starts coming around June 27th.
Gerry, I think the big question here with Chase Calicut is both short-term and long-term. Which position does his decision impact? Because I'm not sure if it's safety or linebacker, short-term or long-term. And quite frankly, Gerry, does it matter? Does Texas just like Chase Calicut as a player and they'll figure everything out later?
You're spot on the last part. I think that's number one and most important, right? Because his frame is going to the future is going to decide what he is. He's going to come in as a safety. DeMarvion, and I'm not comparing him athletically or as a player, but DeMarvion Overshown came in as a safety, right? But there was always the question of, man, you have a tall, long frame, and you haven't even come close to filling that frame out. And it took over time, but then Overshown ends up being a linebacker. And I think Calicut is very similar physically. And I'm not going to say they have the same testing numbers at a combine, but I think it's very, very similar from a frame standpoint. And it's going to be interesting to see. Calicut wants to play safety, of course. I think there's those in North Shore that have been at that program 20 plus years on the coaching side that think he's the best when he's close to the line of scrimmage, and he can end up being a 230-pound linebacker in time. But I don't think it impacts a position right now. I think he would come into Texas as a safety. I think he would come into Georgia as a safety, but I don't think it's a guarantee he's a safety in year 4.
Gerry, before we finish this edition of the Recruiting Breakdown up with defensive line, one more time, let everybody know why, if they've got any insurance needs, they need to get in touch with Texas alum Mark Saunders.
Texas alum Mark Saunders serves the Austin and Round Rock area and the entire state of Texas. That means he's the only insurance agent you'll need. Everything from your home, car, and boat to your motorcycle, RV, and ATV. Do what hundreds of On Texas Football family members have done in the last couple of years. That's called Texas All-State Agent Mark Saunders' office today, 512-218-8571. Here's my personal guarantee. You'll be in great hands with Texas alum Mark Saunders.
CJ, we've talked about defensive line as it relates to Deari Simeon and going to announce on Friday. Texas obviously in it with him. They're in it with Kendall Gerville. They're in it for James Johnson. CJ, I just don't see at this point how Texas tells all of those guys no. At this point, do you feel like if they all want to come to Texas, do you still feel like the staff is willing to take them all and then kind of figure out the rest later?
If all will jump in the fold, I see Texas taking all three. They're that level of talent. Now, of course, is that logistically possible to have 6 defensive linemen in a class? Probably not. But how do you get to a point where you feel comfortable with 5? Or how do you feel comfortable telling someone no? I think that's part of recruiting. It's a tough decision, obviously. But look, those are 3 high-level guys, and all 3 are very seriously taking this Texas recruitment right now in their own recruitments. I know Deari Simeon is a guy that Texas has been on for quite a while. He spent a lot of time on his unofficial back in the spring with Kenny Baker at the facility. Sounded like great returns after his official visit as well. And look, we just talked to Kendall Gerville again, who said, yeah, Texas #1. No more questions right now. Texas is my leader at the time being. And I think there was immediate entrance from James Johnson coming in from Miami Northwestern saying, yeah, I had an official visit scheduled elsewhere, but I wanted to come see Texas again because my April 12th visit in the spring went so well. So there's interest in all 3. I think Texas likes all 3. And that's part of recruiting is, look, some guys got locked in early into the class. They've got spots right now. Do those spots last all the way through? That'll be the big question, as well as do those spots already locked in bump some of these guys on the outside, start looking elsewhere?
Yeah, I was going to add to that, Jeff. There's been a lot of chatter. Could Texas take more than 4? The answer is absolutely. I mean, look, you aren't going to turn down a tremendous football player in your estimation. If that takes the number to 5, it takes the number to 5. But look, if Deari Simeon wanted in and Kendall Gerville wanted in, they're not. Texas is not turning those guys down.
Gerry, I want to circle back to the 2 Florida kids since you were there this spring with those guys both coming off of recent visits. But with Deari Simeon specifically, he's been kind of one of the wild cards in the class period, an unknown. He's been kind of sitting out there. But as we get closer to decision time, this thing is setting up about as good as Kenny Baker and PK and Sark could have hoped for in terms of their chances with him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, he was a guy – he's always been an interesting prospect to me because he's not a big camps guy. Colleges were wondering how big is this guy? Is he 6'1", 265? Is he 6'2", 270? Well, he showed up in Austin 6'2", 1/4", 289. And CJ and I saw him in person. He looks solid. I mean, he's going to be a 305, 310-pound guy, and he's a disruptor at that. So his size, he's got an 80-inch wingspan, 10-inch hands. I mean, he hits all the measurables. And then the tape speaks for itself. And there's a reason Ohio State, after he had planned to cancel that visit last week and fought so hard to get him on campus, that tells you about his talent level. And that Penn State and Michigan and Ohio State, the 3 powers in the Big Ten, all want him. And I think Texas has done a really good job in that recruitment. Kenny Baker's done the bulk of the work with a little help from Kyle Flood, being a New Jersey, New York guy, used to be the head coach at Rutgers, knowing so many people. But I think Kenny Baker's done a really good job there. I think the biggest key, we've heard a little bit more about Texas versus Michigan at the end of the day. We'll see if Ohio State changed that over the weekend, headed into his Friday announcement. I think Penn State did not have a good feel about it late last week, is the academic athletic combo at Texas, Michigan. We've heard more about that leading up to his announcement date. We'll see if that's the theme, because if it is, I think this may come down to Michigan and Texas. And I think Texas is doing pretty well in this one.
Yeah, one more thing on the size, because I know that we're kind of used to the big humans dominating the recruiting trail. Look, Byron Murphy not too long ago, 6'1.5", 304 pounds, 77-inch wingspan there. So I know that that's a lofty comparison, but hey, sometimes on those defensive linemen, it's all about the quickness and those arm lengths, and that's where you find those gems as you continue to develop.
Gerry, let's wrap this up with the 2 Florida kids. I'm kind of glad Kendall Gerville has been out front saying Texas is his leader, because we've spelled that out about as much as we could without coming out and saying it since you were down there in the spring. But James Johnson's the interesting one for Texas to get him on campus first off, and then second off for the good buzz we're hearing coming out of the visit. Gerry, I'll put you on the spot the same way I did CJ. You think it's likely Texas ends up with both of these guys, with Gerville and Johnson, or just one at the end of the day?
I think the dominoes, how the dominoes fall affect the last guy in line. And so right now it's Deari Simeon's announcing the 27th. Kendall Graville's the 2nd. And we don't have a date for James Johnson yet, but it'll be early July. And Miami's still big in the fight there. One thing to remember about James Johnson, I actually think going into last weekend, Georgia was the slight favorite over Texas and Miami and Florida. No matter where this guy commits, Florida's going to – same with Gurville. I mean, Florida and Miami aren't giving up. But I do think Georgia was in the lead for James Johnson headed into last weekend. James Johnson did spend his birthday in Austin, which CJ, how's that? Is that a good time? I assume that's a good time if you spend.
Yeah, normally as I leave to go up to Dallas for mine.
Right. Yeah, but so James Johnson's going to be interesting. I think he likes Texas a lot. The question is, what happens if Simeon and Gurville jumped in before him?
All right, we'll have plenty to come on the upcoming visits here on the channel and over to ontexasfootball.com, where if you're not an OTF OG, that's all right. You can become one today. Get over to ontexasfootball.com, sign up using the promo code OTFOG. That'll get you 1 year of access for $39.95. As much as we talk about on the channel, we've got up to the second recruiting information going on over at ontexasfootball.com. We've got football team news, notes, and nuggets. We've got baseball portal. We've got hoops. We've got softball portal over there. So anything you want as it relates to what's going on the 40 acres, get it over to ontexasfootball.com. And again, the promo code OTFOG will get you 1 year of access for $39.95. Gerry, CJ, thank you guys for the knowledge and expertise. As always, thank you to Matthew for producing it behind the scenes and the entire On Texas football staff. For Gerry and CJ, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And until next time, welcome.